I have murdered 21, I am not at all regretful of any of these things. Before the execution, it's usually customary for the condemned to take the stage for the last time and deliver his final words to the public. Whether it's a chilling statement designed to shock or disturb those present, a light-hearted statement, trying to get little laughs, or a final slap in the face of society. Criminals have had some very special notes in the minutes over the years. Funny thing to say before they take their last breath. Curious to know more? Now let's get deeper into this. Hello everyone and welcome to our channel. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update. Having said that, let's get into the video. Clarence Ray Allen hired a hitman to assassinate 8 witnesses who testified against him in his trial for the murder of his son's girlfriend in 1974. Later, a paroled fellow inmate killed 3 of them and was apprehended with Allen's hit list, which was used to convict him. On January 17, 2006, he was killed via lethal injection. His last words were, "My final words will be, Hoka, hey, today is a good day to die," he stated. "Thank you very much. I adore you all. Goodbye." Bonin, William Bonin, was convicted of the killings of 14 men and boys between 1979 and 1980, but was suspected of raping and killing many more, was dubbed the Freeway Killer, because he dumped his victims along Southern California highways. On February 23, 1996, he was executed by lethal injection at San Quentin State Prison. His last words were, "I would argue that when a person has a serious notion of doing anything significant against the law, they go to a quiet spot and think about it seriously." Harris George Bernard on March 11, 1989. George Bernard Harris won $500 at a craps game in Kansas and exchanged the money for 2 machine guns, then solicited the help of another man to keep the guns secure. The second man handed over the weapons to a third man, but when Harris demanded them back later that night, the third man couldn't find them, and Harris shot him dead with a revolver. On September 13, 2000, he was executed by lethal injection. "Someone needs to kill my trial counsel," he says in his final words. Eileen Wuornos was a sex worker who shot numerous men on Florida highways between 1989 and 1990. Her homicidal spree was converted into a successful Hollywood film starring Charlize Theron after she was convicted of 6 murders and sentenced to death. On October 9, 2002, Wuornos was killed by lethal injection. Her last words were, "I'd simply like to announce that I'm sailing with the Rock and that I'll come back on June 6th, like Independence Day, with Jesus, big mothership and all. Just like in the movie. I'll be right back." Kimberly McCarthy pretended to borrow sugar from the home of a 71-year-old neighbor in Lancaster, Texas, before stabbing her to death. She was charged with the murders of 2 additional elderly people in 1998, but she was never tried. McCarthy was assassinated on June 26, 2013 by fatal injection. His last words were, "This is a victory, not a defeat. You already know where I'm going. I'm returning home to be with Jesus. Maintain your trust. I adore you all. Thank you very much, Chaplain." Rosendo Rodriguez III admitted to killing a 16-year-old girl and burying her body in Texas trash in 2004. Later that year, he was convicted of killing and abandoning a 29-year-old woman in the same manner, and he was tied to at least 5 more sexual assaults. On March 27, 2018, Rodriguez was killed by lethal injection. His last words were, "I fought a good fight and ran a terrific race. Warden, I'm prepared to accompany my father." Apple George. This pun was to be the final words of convicted murderer George Apple before he was killed in the electric chair in New York in 1928 for the murder of a New York City police officer, clearly preserving his sense of humor till the very end. His last words were, "Well, gentlemen, you are about to see a cooked apple." Peter Kruten, sometimes known as the Vampire of Dusseldorf, is suspected of killing approximately 60 people in Germany. He raped and drank at least one of his victims' blood. On July 2, 1931, Kruten was executed by guillotine. His last words were, "Tell me, please, will I still be able to hear the sound of my blood streaming from the stump of my neck after my head has been severed? That would be the greatest joy of all." John Spenkelink was a vagabond who was convicted of murdering a traveling companion in self-defense. He was also the first man executed in Florida after the United States Supreme Court reintroduced the death penalty in 1976. His last words were, "Capital punishment. Those who do not have the capital receive the punishment."
Everybody has hope back there. I don't think if there'd just be a very few that don't.
Bloody Babs Barbara Graham, a prostitute, drug addict, and murderess, was executed in the San Quentin gas chamber with 2 accomplices in 1955. Graham killed an elderly woman during a botched heist. When Joe Ferretti, the man in charge of her execution, put her into the gas chamber, he urged her, "Now take a big breath and it won't hurt you." To which she replied, "How would you know?" His last words were, "Good people are always so sure they're right." Gilmore. Gary Gilmore was executed by a volunteer firing squad in Utah on January 17, 1977. After being convicted of murdering a hotel manager, he was the first person killed after the United States reintroduced the capital penalty in 1976. After a 10-year gap, Gilmore gave his organs and 2 people received his corneas immediately after he was executed. Notably, Gilmore rose to prominence after his death when advertising executive Dan Veden cited Gilmore's parting comments as the basis for Nike's tagline. His last words were, "Let's do it," are the final words. Carl Panzram was hung on September 5, 1930 for being a serial killer, rapist, arsonist, and burglar. He refused to appeal his sentence without exhibiting any remorse for his actions, even threatening to kill representatives of human rights organizations who attempted to plead on his behalf. Panzram remained defiant until the end, telling his executioner, "Hurry up, you Hoosier bastard. While you're messing around, I could hang a dozen men. In my lifetime, I have murdered 21 people and penetrated thousands of burglaries, robberies, larcenies, and arsons." His last words were, "I have committed sodomy on over 1,000 male humans. I am not at all regretful of any of these things." Timothy McVeigh is most known as the Oklahoma City bomber, having been convicted of planting the bomb that killed 149 adults and 19 children on April 19, 1995 at the federal building in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. McVeigh had no final comments before being killed by lethal injection in Indiana on June 11th. He did, however, leave a handwritten statement quoting the final lines of Sir William Ernest Henley's poem Invictus. His last words were, "I am the lord of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." On August 10, 1966, James French was the final person executed by an electric chair under Oklahoma's death penalty. Already sentenced to life in prison, but purportedly frightened to attempt suicide, French murdered his cellmate, ostensibly to force the state to execute him. His last words were, "How about this for a headline? French fries." In Oklahoma, Thomas J. Grosso was killed by lethal injection for strangling an 87-year-old woman to death with her own Christmas lights on Christmas Eve, while stealing a television and $12. In the United States, convicts on death row are traditionally allowed to eat anything they want for their last supper before being executed. This was something Grosso took extremely seriously. His most recent meal order included 2 dozen steamed mussels, 2 dozen steamed clams, seasoned with a wedge of lemon, a double cheeseburger from Burger King, a half dozen barbecued square ribs, 2 strawberry milkshakes, 1/2 of a pumpkin pie with whipped cream and diced strawberries, and a 16-ounce can of SpaghettiOs, with meatballs served at room temperature. Unfortunately for him, the length or complexity of his list appeared to confuse kitchen personnel, who served him spaghetti instead of his SpaghettiOs. His last words were, "I didn't get my SpaghettiOs, I got spaghetti." The final remarks, "I want the press to be aware of this." Robert Alton Harris was the murderer of 2 teenage boys. He was the first person to be executed in California in decades in 1992. His final words were a misquote from the film Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. His last words were, "You can be a king or a street sweeper, but everyone dances with the Grim Reaper." After a bungled rail heist, famed bandit Tom Blackjack Ketchum was apprehended when he was sentenced to death by hanging. Ketchum spoke these now famous words before his execution was botched and the noose severed his head clean off his body. His final words to the boys were, "I'll be in hell before you start breakfast. Set her free." So what do you think? We would like to hear from you in the comments down below. Make sure you are subscribed along with turning on the notifications. Thanks for watching and I hope to see you back in the next video.